Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing is, what's really driving this discussion forward? So you're on here like, why am I looking to these new gas solutions, from my previous solution? A lot of you maybe Citrix already, for example, right? So maybe I'm this, I don't know, but what's kind of driving it forward? Um, Citrix and Broadcom, in short, and these two kind of go together, right? So the moves that they made, and then the licensing shakeups, for example, on the Citrix side, also on the Broadcom side with the VMware stuff, but these two changes alone were a tsunami for all of these the discussions going forward, and what are my options? Citrix doing what they're doing, Broadcom doing what they're doing, more leading into the infrastructure pieces, but they kind of go hand in hand. These are two big ones in our world over the last couple of years. Right? So cloud first mentality. I mean, Shane, and we're seeing it everywhere, right? I mean, um, really, when it comes to leadership, it's like, how can I go cloud first? And when you think cloud first in the UC, that's what cloud PC and AVD are, right? So from that, even if it's we don't really play in that, but even if it's AVD, for example, on Azure Local, formerly Azure Stack is underneath that on-prem, that's still all driven, managed via Azure Arc. It's a cloud first mentality. So that cloud first mentality from leadership across the board has been pushing this forward. Um, so that's always going to be a driving factor from that standpoint. And then obviously Win 10, it's dying off this year. Everybody's getting ready for this. And what's an easy way to get ready for this? I got to move to Windows 11. I got all these changes from Citrix happening right now and all these things going on. How can I get to an optimized image in Windows 11? And, I got to move there anyway and change up my image. Well, Cloud PC and AVD, you can start with an optimized Azure image right out of the gates. And that can be like, propel you in that Windows 11 strategic play that you got to do there and get ready, for the October end of life. So obviously the Win 10 and Win 11 is a big, big one going on right now. M365, Microsoft just keeps adding more features into their entitlements, which then kind of plays into one that's coming up here. I'll just throw these out there as the Azure momentum. So Microsoft in the EUC world and Azure hand in hand. They're licensed. They have the upper hand in the cloud space. There's
One might say they stalled the market till they were ready to rock and roll, right? But
yeah,
they just done some incredible work, though.
they're doing what they got to do, and they're doing it right. But that's really propelling Azure for the growth Azure side versus what AWS was. Right? They keep closing the gap, and it's really a big part is Windows and EUC and the stuff like Windows 11 multi-session and AVD. Probably all this stuff is Azure focused, and they own Windows. They own Office 365. They own the tools that we use on a daily basis for 90 some percent of us, right? So that propels the hybrid cloud story, Azure momentum, um, and then just the modern, quote unquote, modern identity and device management, right? Into
Yes.
I want modern management, right? So that's
Yeah, that's been a huge one too. Is like you're seeing the transition to modern identity going towards Entra, and at the same time seeing a convergence of what was originally the System Center stuff and the Intune, traditional group policies and Intune policies all kind of going like this and converging. And that's where we'll talk later around like application packaging and why those things are even more important when you want that same package across both estates, right? And that kind of hybrid environment. So here we
yep.
go.
So here we go. We got splashes of everything on here, right? So AI helped us with this one, of course.
But man, you gotta admit when you use the AI, makes
It's
sense.
obvious,
Or
but it's fun. All right. So we got a little
you can tell by the words, or we look a little messed up for now, but awesome. So yeah, let's rock and roll. We're gonna kick it off here. We're all revved up, ramped up. Suspense is building. So let's talk about Windows 365 Cloud PC. So the first thing, as you know, you've probably seen, is, I don't know if you've seen 2014 came out, Gartner report, desktop as a service. Microsoft just shooting top right there, as a market leader, and one might say, well, how is that possible? How do you jump ahead of where Citrix was, or Amnissa at the time, right? And really, it's around just the sheer volume of growth that they've had on the cloud PC side. Also, if you dig into that report, they're saying desktops as a service, really looking at like pay per user per month, a little bit different than Citrix is really, when you talk about Dash, we're talking about a control plane, a NISA control plane, right? And we'll talk about it here in a second. And Windows 365 is really a SaaS platform, and that's really the huge difference between Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365. We're talking SaaS, right? We're talking similar to Microsoft 365, Office 365, right? You have basically SKUs. These are T-shirt sizes, SKUs that you choose from, right? So we, again, as Oz mentioned, we're not going to go into business. We're really going to focus prize. That's a new word. Focus.
They always have
Hold our
once
business.
in a while.
Yeah, it just happens. We're going to focus on CPC Enterprise, as well as CPC Frontline for shift work, and then we're going to also talk about the new shared model as well today. That's in Tech Preview. So when you look at Windows 365 Cloud PC, it's transparent. There's no story here, and this one gets a discount. You go here, it's all on the website, right? There's a wide menu, but it's very fixed, right? It's 2 vCPU, 4, 8, 16. You'll see the RAM is very fixed. You do have different options from a storage standpoint. And then there's basically monthly pricing. Again, this is per user per month. If you're a larger customer, potentially there's some discounts, and Microsoft obviously works with you on this sort of stuff. When it comes to the pricing, but the idea here is keep in mind the flexibility here is a little limited. But these are dedicated today. We'll talk about the different models, but on 24/7, right? And that's a big difference. So the other piece here is for $5 extra a month, and we're gonna really drive into this. You're getting cross regional DR for $5, right? And there's even a new option that's even a shorter RPO. But when you look at Frontline, really it's about shift work, and the feature parity is not there. And so we'll talk about that as well. But again, just the takeaway here is on the CPC side is SKU based. And so with that, there's also use cases around GPU. So there's an enterprise, Windows 365 enterprise. So for those, CAD users, those high graphical intense users, you're looking at a standard, a super, and a max. And you'll notice across the board the frame buffer really from a GPU perspective is important, right? 8, 12, or 16. And you'll notice what's in blue is really important. It says variable. Um, we've recently experienced this on a project. Customers, working on a proof of concept that Jumpstart we'll talk about later. And they basically had the standard SKU, which was 4 by 16 by 8. And when they actually got their desktop, it was, much larger, right? It was a 12 vCPUs, 128 gigs of RAM, but still that 8 gig frame buffer. And the reason for that is the variables in the SKUs and the availability, they're guaranteeing you the minimums, but you might get something better. And so once they got it, they're like, we're not letting this go. But that's something that is key there is from a GPU perspective, because there are different GPU cards. You're going to get at least the minimum, which is important to call out there.
It's very interesting to me because you could have one user get the big dog and another user just get the minimum.
Yeah, and that's one of those where you like hide the task manager, right? You don't want them showing off like, "Hey, Fred, come look at my desktop over here." It's like that's like we want to app mask that task manager. We do not want them seeing like going around.
Yeah. Fun fact,
As
these are all based on Microsoft's, if you're curious, the A10s. So there's A10 based instances in Azure,
Mhm.
not the older T4 models of the GPUs. These are all based on.
Yeah. And we'll dive into the architecture a little more, but I just want to point out from the Windows 365 perspective, it does ride on the Azure Virtual Desktop control plane, right? So it's using the Azure Virtual Desktop control plane service, so the gateway broker functionality, but there's newer, same clients, right? It's a remote desktop client, the Windows app client, all that's still the same. Really, the big difference, and you'll notice from a Windows 365 perspective as a service, those PCs are not in your tenant. They're not in your subscription. They're managed. They're there, and from a Microsoft perspective, they're in their tenant. They're managing them, right? And then the networking side, which we're going to break down, I don't want to spoil it here, but we have a Microsoft hosted network option, true zero trust, zero integration to your existing subscriptions, and ANC, where we have kind of a nick in your subscription, allowing you to extend on-prem and giving you a lot more capabilities. But it is important to know it does sit on top of the ABD service, but it is, again, a SaaS service with additional services like the capacity of regional management, provisioning service, et cetera.
Yep. And then diving into this, right? Just a real quick, Azure Virtual Desktop, just a little backstory. It used to be Windows Virtual Desktop back in the day. It's Azure Virtual Desktop. Sometimes that's used interchangeably. For those of you that are Citrix, you might be doing Citrix on Azure. That's Citrix on Azure. It is not AVD when you're doing Citrix and hooking into Azure and brokering to a desktop in Azure with your entitlements for M365. So there is a difference there. That's Citrix on Azure. AVD is their control plane, their PaaS services. That only Microsoft can use AVD. Now, as Shane mentioned, Cloud PC, W365, that's all based on the AVD control plane. So AVD is was WVD, so that was their first, and then now Cloud PC is the newer stuff that they have here. So AVD just a little different. Ultimate flexibility. It's got everything you could think of, right? So when you want flexibility, not those t-shirt sizes, that Shane was mentioning here a bit ago. That's AVD. That's like what you can do in Citrix or Parallels, any of these, where you can dictate like on-prem what you want specifically. Now you are Azure only in the case that we're talking about. If you're in Azure, so you are dictated by the instances that you have in Azure, but that is way more than Cloud PC is those fixed price SKUs that you saw earlier, right? So you can do the pooled model. Now, just FYI, there's not really a non-persistent like in the Citrix world. It's pooled. Um, and then they have a persistent model, which is their personal host pools. You can pay as you go, 1 year, 3 year reserve. So there's a lot of fun stuff you can do on the pricing based on how many you're going to have up and running all the time. It has remote app and desktop, so the seamless application sides there with remote app or desktop. You can do client OS, server OS. Client OS side, you can do single session, multi-session, so you can do any and all of those if you want. You do have to have architect knowledge, right? So you got to work with us or build a landing zone. You got to design it out properly. Just if you were doing like something on like Citrix on Azure or any of these others on Azure, you got to have your EUC landing zone ready to go, tied into your hub, your trans, basically all of that stuff, your hub and spoke, and everything's got to be laid out and secured and governance, and everything's got to be there. You control it through the Azure portal. We're going to talk about Nerdio. That's where it's very limited from an Azure portal perspective and the AVD blade. Again, highly customized, any supported instance size in the regions. So it's all based on regional instance availability and what you can do. Again, that's the maximum flexibility. FS Logics from a personalization standpoint. And then the storage options ties into, Azure NetApp services, Azure Files, the manual backup duplication. If you got personal ASR, all that kind of stuff you're responsible for in this world. So you can do hibernation with this to help save on costs. And then it does have built-in scaling plans native to AVD. Dynamic auto scaling with Nerdio as well that we'll talk to, but quite a bit different. And we're only pointing out like mainly differences here, right, on these slides, not like all the features that come with each one, but just something.
Yep. Yeah. So on the Windows 365 side, on the Cloud PC side, again, fixed SKUs per user per month on 24/7. As Oz mentioned on his scenario, a lot more flexibility there. But in our case, 24/7, it's nice to be able to always access your desktop. Think of it like, if we're just talking the dedicated model, like you handed someone a laptop, you're handing that contractor a laptop for all intents and purposes. It's on 24/7, right? Full SaaS, it's 100%, it's SLA backed. It's 99.99% SLA for the Windows 365 service. On the management service, the management control plane's got it's got a 6-hour RTO with RPO of 30 minutes. It's 11 nines on the data resiliency side, and there's automated in-zone resiliency, right? So if anything goes down within those zones, zones or availability zones are a concept within Azure, a construct. Essentially, we have free data centers. Certain regions support them within a small geographical area, and then all that. Typically, if we were in the world of on the AVD side, we have to design for that, right? And this is all handled by Microsoft. You're not worrying about networking. Um, you do if you go into the ANC side, Azure Network Connection. We'll talk about that later, um, but the idea is it's 100% managed by Microsoft. You don't have to think about these things. Regional DR, right? Basically for an extra $5, whole nother region, and we'll talk about what that looks like here shortly. Simplified management, right? Automated integrated integration with Intune. So very similar to like Autopilot. When you create that provisioning policy, you assign that user to the Entra group. It will automatically provision that Cloud PC, and it'll be managed by Intune integrated. Keep note here, Windows 10, Windows 11 only, right? We're not able to do, multi-session, server OS, right? Not possible today. And not possible to do multi-session Windows 11 or Windows 10. It's single session only. Built-in backup in DR. So things like you have to think about in the AVD world, like, are we doing snapshots? Are we doing backups? That's all baked in with user settings. You can give them, multiple snapshots, being able to do self-service restore. That's all basically part of the service. User screws up, they can basically reset their cloud PC, with a phone call. It can also be driven via the Graph APIs, which is pretty cool. Zero trust by design with Microsoft hosted network. Oz is going to cover that, and I'll drive into the ANC side here shortly. Built-in e-discovery forensics mode. If they're from a security perspective, if a cloud PC has an incident, can actually kind of channel that off and have it kind of basically take that disk and drop it to a storage account for forensics purposes. You'd have to do all that manually on the AVD side. Shift work with frontline. So frontline license, we'll dig into that, but essentially that's one license. Pay for one license, 3 people can connect for the cost of one license. But obviously that's shift-based work. And a new tech preview we'll talk about as well, which is frontline shared, which is kind of that give you that non-persistent model or pooled model with Cloud PC, which is pretty slick. So this gives you an idea of the differences, and we'll drive into the use cases as well here shortly.